Thank you so much for joining us today in person and online. Today is an intimate conversation with Nicole Daedone. Nicole is the creator of orgasmic meditation and the author of national bestsellers, The Eros Sutras and Erotic Justice. Eros is the fuel and the connective force that guides us into manifesting who we really are. You are the artist of your own life, and the world is waiting for your expression to awaken and draw out what it wants to bring forth. Today's event will include a talk from Nicole, and then we'll open the floor for questions. If you have any questions online, you can put them in the chat and I'll read them for you for Nicole in the room. And we'll take some questions from the room as well. And then at the end, we'll close with some reflections. We will begin now with a short clip from opera singer Maria Callas.
Hello. I was good. That was going to be in the middle of the talk, but but we were upstairs. We were upstairs. We were choosing the music, and because part of the talk is about call, all of these roosters came to the second floor and started crowing. I wanted to start with that. I think it's a good sign in terms of what we're talking about. So I'll start the way I start every talk. That's thank you to everyone, every force, everything that put this back together. There's this funny idea. This avatar was built on the internet, and it was built by people's comments. It became an actual being on the internet, and I feel like I'm that avatar put together by love of friends, old and new, and people who came out of the woodwork, and a funny Republican lobbyist, Zen Roshi, my Phanama Lama, my Tibetan Drupal, and just a lot of people made it possible to stand again. So may everything I say be for the benefit. And this is the stance of gratitude for that was received. So let's see. Last week we talked about power, women's power, and I got a lot of questions after that. One of the questions was, why is it that if we have power, we aren't connected? How can that possibly be? We have all of this power that you talk about, Nicole. How can it be? Have you never read a feminist book in your life? And I have a few ideas on that. And so that was really what informed today's talk. So there's I think she's hilarious. Not everybody does. She's a super provocateur comedian, feminist comedian, Michelle Bucco. I don't know if anybody knows who she is. She's so lovable. She's just so lovable, but the things she says are so edgy. And so she has this one part where she talks about, women, we're so hard on each other. We expect each other to be perfect. And she talks about the fact that she can't seem to manage to be a good enough feminist, no matter what she does. And what is she wow, maybe, yeah. So see, she's a real provocateur. I can't even see what she said. But the funny part was, she said that there was this period recently where all of women seemed to really be organizing. And that these men would say, "Oh no," she said that they were actually the younger men were saying, "Oh no, they're organizing." And she said, but the older men would say, "It's not a problem." They had seen this many times before, and she said, a husband said, my wife has been in 8 book clubs, and she can't manage to stay friends with any of the women. And there are streets we can't drive down because they don't like each other. And so I think she's pointing to something, and something that's challenging about that. Why would that be? Why would that be that we would have this power if we have it? And Why would it be that we would be, she says, you know, we're half the world. We could take over if we wanted. Why would it be that we don't or aren't? And this has been my question for about 30 years now. It's a deep question. It's not a light, fair question when you look at it. How could that be? And, you know, I choose to not believe that we're just merely inferior. And yet you look out in the world and there's subjugation, there's oppression, there's abominable women's healthcare, there's the fact that women are expected to do and be everything, have kids, work, or exhausted, or nervous systems are fried. How can you see that and still believe in our power? So that one of my favorite, I tend to collect stories. That's the only way I think we can do it. I studied semantics, and when I did, you'll hear me say this one often, there are certain things that I repeat, but a pivotal moment for me was with a Japanese student. We were studying language itself, and we were talking about masculine language and feminine language. And the feminine language, she said, is like Japanese, is like pointing 100 little spotlights on a topic, whereas masculine language is like a giant spotlight on a topic. And I think that was a moment when I first began to see what the challenge might be that we're facing, that it's much more nuanced, that it's not as out there, it's not as in your face, and that it's more a suggestion. So one of my favorite proverbs is an African proverb, and it's until the lion tells his story, and I would say her story, or his, but in this case it's hers. The tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And when I first heard this, I thought, until we women come together and know our stories and tell our stories, then it'll always look askew. It'll always look backward. So what do we do? What do we begin to do? And how do we begin to collect our stories? So how do you describe women's power? Unique power. It isn't a metric of something outside of ourselves. It isn't a shadow of another kind of power, an equal and complementary power. And I was listening to my Phenomena Lama this weekend, and he was talking about something else. He wasn't talking about women's power, but it gave me a good model for how to speak about it, because he was talking about music. And he said, music is comprised of two separate things. One is the instrumentation, the sound, the violin, the piano, the drums, the cymbal, but it's equal and matched to silence. Music actually issues from the silence. Not only does it issue from it, but it punctuates. I mean, yeah, not only does it issue from it, but silence punctuates the music. Not only this, but it's where we go in the music to come back and find the meaning of the music. The music itself, just the instruments, is cacophony. It's just clanging and banging if it isn't punctuated by silence. That, to my mind, is one of the best ways that I see women's power. That there is a way that it issues from us. And that if we aren't in full ownership of it, then the cacophony that we see, the unpunctuated, endless sound, looks desperate and hopeless. And yeah, so I began to look at ways to speak to that, because how do you speak to the invisible or the inaudible? How do you speak to something that's potent but isn't so obvious in the world of appearances? And I used to talk to my same semantics professor, Dr. Dean Barnland, who's, I think, one of the best semanticists in the world. He's passed, but he was also a Zen practitioner. And so he knew my dilemma. You know, I was working with him, but I was also a graduate teaching associate and women's studies, and I was always asking him, how do we communicate this? How do we communicate this that once you see it through the optical illusion, because that's to me what it is. It's our second-class citizenship is an optical illusion with a lot of obscurations. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I would talk to him about ways to have people see it. And he said, oh, well, let's go to this concert, which didn't seem like a great solution at the time. Okay. And there were several other grad students who went, and we piled into this amphitheater in the Presidio in San Francisco. There were seats, comfortable seats, and it was beautiful. And the sound was beautiful, just the echo when you first walked in, and it had that feeling of high anticipation. And we were sitting there, and there was a piano, and in walked a musician who I was informed was famous, which I was, oh, big deal. So he sat down and he continued to sit. And people kind of wrestled around, and you would see people checking their playbill. A few people check their watches, and you could feel the kind of discomfort that you feel in that environment. And he continued to sit in front of the piano. Nothing happened. And then he continued to sit. And then suddenly, almost simultaneously, it felt like, we got it. He wasn't going to be playing that piano. That anticipation was there. And in that moment, I think we collectively kind of sunk in. When I sunk in, I began to notice something different. I began to notice, oh, there's already sounds in the room. Oh, wow, you can almost hear at a really subtle level. Oh, everyone in the room kind of feels more connected in this silence. Oh, we're all paying attention to something together, but it isn't one big thing. It's a collective experience. Oh, I can hear my own heartbeat. I can hear the sound of the person next to me. Oh, this silence actually isn't an irritant. It isn't something that I make it through. It's something precious. And there was a fundamental feeling, I remember, of sufficiency. It was different. There wasn't the high intensity of actually going to a concert of some kind. I was driving home with him, and he said, do you feel like that helped you find the answer? And I did. I really, it was a moment where, when you're constantly pointing, you need things to point with. You're pointing to the moon. You got to have the things to point with. So when we're talking about a women's mythology, something that speaks to a woman's experience, Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero's Journey, which really lays out the journey, right? And it's supposed to be all people's journeys. A lot of these traditions are supposed to represent all people. And when that happened, a lot of women said, I don't necessarily see my unions. I don't necessarily see my experience in that book. Why don't you write the complementary book? Why don't you write the heroine's journey? Now, this is why I like Joseph Campbell. His response was, women don't need to make the journey. In the whole mythological journey, the woman is there. All she has to do is realize that she's the place that people are trying to get to. Go, Joe! But that seems to be a little bit more challenging than than Joe had anticipated. And there is a woman, Maureen Murdoch, who actually wrote the heroine's journey. There are several versions of the heroine's journey, but I'm just going to give it to you. This is this is an entire sutra study in itself. But so it's interesting, though. It's really interesting. So the first thing she does on the feminine journey, interestingly, is she separates from the feminine. She separates from her own feminine. And what she does is she begins to identify with the masculine. That's number 2. She goes on a road of trials and meeting dragons, and then she begins to experience the boon of success. All of a sudden, she is successful according to this masculine model. Then the heroine awakens to feelings of the aridity and death of that experience. I would say, if we were to use the silence metaphor, she misses that silence, that vast open space, and she's just in the clanging of the instruments. So then what happens is she goes down and she has the initiation with the goddess. In this case, we'll say it's Persephone. Anybody's familiar with that story, because it really lays out what women go through, or could, a journey a woman could go through. You make the descent down to, Persephone makes the descent. And when she does, the first thing she does is she loses everything. Then in that loss, she touches into something. What she touches into is a fundamental fertility, is what they say, fecundity. She touches into the creative impulse itself. When she touches into that, suddenly that dry world, now she's hydrated and nourished. And according to many traditions, what arises within her is what's called the genius, or the genie, this archetypal energy that moves through in order to create. And then what she does is she returns. And when she returns as spring itself. She now is the creative force. Now, I love this part. I think this part is important in the female narrative, because she returns whole. She had rejected the original idea of the feminine. Then she rejected the original idea of the masculine. She went down and she found herself. And then when she found herself, what happened was she came back to heal all. And one of the stages that I think is so fantastic is she also is here to heal the masculine now. She now has the power to do that. And then she integrates. That's the story. So I have a friend, a dear friend, one of my best friends. She is one of the best curators I've ever met. And so she sends me any kind of story that, that might help me point to things. And she's actually sent me 2 of the stories today. So because I myself have had to go through this journey in a certain way, where my identity used to be teacher. And then I made it to that place, and there is a certain aridity to it, because it wasn't natural to who I am. That kind of pedigree. I joke that that I have all of these friends who have titles, right? Either before or after a PhD or some kind of teaching title, and they'll sign with their titles, and then I just sign Woman Nicole. But I think the graduation, in a sense, really is into artist or storyteller. And so she helps me collect these stories to tell. So one of the great stories, and she was the editor for this book in 1988, and it's the story of fierce feminine compassion. And I'll begin with the opening, because she wrote it, it's so exquisite. And then I'll tell you the story of Durga. So the world stood poised on the brink of destruction. Rivers dried up, plants refused to grow, people starved. There was war everywhere. Slaughter prevailed, dancing stopped, even singing was forgotten. The demons known as the asuras, which are greed, hatred, and delusion, were loose in the world, raging unchecked across heaven, earth, drunk with destruction. No one could stop them, not even the gods who had been defeated one by one. Humiliated, the gods withdrew to the heights of the Himalayas and took counsel amongst themselves to no avail. Their dilemma was insoluble. They had lost all power against these demons and could only leave the world to its inevitable destruction. Then it was remembered that this time had been foretold. A demon, greed, hatred, and delusion, would come to destroy the world, and only a woman could defeat the demon. Only a woman could save the world. And I would just change one part of that and just say woman. And like I did in my original TED Talk where I said, and those who love us.
Mhm.
So the beauty of this story is that I think this is actually a myth that we can live into. It's passionate and intense, and I'll probably tell the whole story next week, but I'll give you the basic structure. Durga comes in on these flames of fire, and she battles and she wins. Great. But the Asuras are still angry. They've retreated, but they come back. And when they come back, then she cuts off their buffalo head. Oh, okay, so they go away, but they come back. Now, if anybody knows the story of the Buddha, this is going to be funny because the Asuras, Mara in that case, sent in some lusty ladies to try to seduce the Buddha, and the Buddha sat and was unmoved. In this story, the Asuras send in 2 men to propose to her. So, and really that speaks to the potential, not just of marriage per se, but of a woman's leaving her path in order to fit into a role of dependent as opposed to role of equal. But that's not necessarily marriage itself, but that's what it's meant to signify. And she says, oh no, I can't marry you. I vowed to only marry he who could defeat me. Well, this really upsets them. So as you can imagine. And so they send in many, I mean, just millions and millions of soldiers at this point. And she gets so mad at this point that Kali, if anybody knows Kali, the queen of destruction, bursts from her head. 1,000 drops of blood turned into 1,000 female warriors, and they win. But now, so this is important because it's a call to connect with the sisters at a point to get strength. But now is her final battle, because the Asuras are angry and they say, no, you cheated. You called in women to help you. It doesn't count. So then happens. She pierces him in the heart. Now, the piercing of the heart is the symbol of fierce compassion. She pierces with fierce compassion, and he loses once and for all. So this sounds great. So the people are thrilled, and they make her the queen of the universe. And they offer her all of the adulation that the queen of the universe would deserve. And I like this part of the story too, because she says, I don't want any of that. I don't want to be the queen of the universe. I don't want your adulation. I want to go to the silence. But if you ever need me, I'll return. That I think is a really beautiful way of seeing a feminine dynamic. So I have one more story, and that's the story of Maria Callas, which is why I played that video. So the friend who sent me this story had sent me a story about her as well. I didn't really like the first one, but I went down the rabbit hole. I watched all the videos. I read all of the books. I all of the articles. This woman is fascinating. I think she, in many ways, is an emblem of both what's right and pointing to something that's lacking. So she is described as the essential singer. She is opera, one of the articles said. This was my favorite part. She imagined and reconstructed a vanished world through her voice. The Bible of opera, Leonard Bernstein said. So if you saw in that video and the 500 other videos I watched, what you see is it's transcendent. There's one video where she's just standing. It's a good 2 minutes too, a lot of music. She's just standing. And you watch her, a fairly beautiful woman. And her arms are wrapped around her shoulders and the music is playing. But suddenly you notice her more animated. Her facial expression doesn't change, but her face changes. And it begins to get more and more, I would say, almost otherworldly, more and more inhabited. And then you begin to notice a slight sway in her. She's known for the subtlety of her movement. And then all of a sudden, as if rising from the ground, the sound comes through her. And it's remarkable. I love one of the quotes was, her secret is her ability to transfer the musical plane, the suffering of the character she plays, the nostalgic longing for lost happiness, the anxious fluctuation between hope and despair, between pride and supplication, between irony and generosity, which in the end dissolve into superhuman inner pain. The most diverse and opposite of sentiments, cruel deceptions, ambitious desires, burning tenderness, grievous sacrifices, all the torments of the heart acquire in her singing that mysterious truth. She's willing to go the whole range of human emotions so that we might all get to feel what we couldn't otherwise feel. Somebody once wrote about Judy Garland, something similar. They said, why did we call her back again and again? Not as if, oh, this is James Hillman, by the way, not as if she had been giving a good performance, but it was as if she was offering salvation. As we listened to her voice, as we watched her in her tattered tramp costume, we forgot, and this is the acid test, who she was, and indeed who we were ourselves. As with all true clowns, for Judy Garland is as fine a clown as she is a singer. She seemed to be neither male nor female, young or old, pretty or plain. She has no glamour, only magic. She expressed a few simple, common feelings so purely that they floated about in the dark theater, bodiless, as if detached from any specific personality. Isn't that beautiful? Because it gave people permission to feel the whole wide range of human experience. I think that's so pretty. So often people ask me, well, I don't understand. What could Om possibly have to do with women and women's power? I don't get it. And I'll say it speaks to this, you look at Maria Callas, and this is the part where I think it's not as exquisitely realized as it could be, because in every single article that I read, at some point, it said this woman's great talent, her superhuman talent, was overshadowed by her difficulties. I think that's important. One of the difficulties, there are 4 primary difficulties she went through. One of the difficulties is that she was sitting with her manager at lunch, and her manager said to her, I think you need to lose some weight. And she was 200 pounds. She was 5'8". 200 pounds on 5'8" isn't huge, And she said, no, I'm actually happy with my weight, thanks. Because they were going out of the restaurant, and there was one of those scales that you stand on. And they put a quarter in the scale. She weighed, and she was so ashamed. It says she was so ashamed that after that, she lost 80 pounds. She lost 80 pounds, and she lost her voice. Her voice was so strong. There was so much resonance. There was so much intensity that was required, that her vocal cords were damaged. Her diaphragm was now too collapsed to hold the weight of her gift. But you know what they did? They said, but at least now she's beautiful. The second one was, and this is heartbreaking, but I think it's true in a woman's story often. She was involved with Aristotle Onassis, and this was a big controversy. And she said, you know, I just wanted to be a woman. For a period of time, I just wanted to be a woman. And then the third part is everyone thought that they owned her. She didn't own herself in a certain way. Somebody who wasn't even her manager sued her. I wish I had this picture. Do we have this picture? Oh, let's see. And this was her response. I love her. Somebody sued her saying they were her manager who wasn't her manager. And this was a big controversy in and of itself. And then there was the story of this rivalry that always surrounded her, this great rivalry. And I love, she's so funny. She said, let me see if I can find it, that she called it rivality. She's from Greece. So the quote is, this rivality was really building from the people in the newspapers and the fans, but I think it was very good for both of us. And she said, why would there be rivality? Her voice is very different. And I like how she actually felt and approached it. You know, I think that's actually a woman's way of looking at it. So back to the Om. So with great gifts for women, I think often comes great controversy, great difficulty, great requirements of endurance, but I think they're part and parcel of the heroine's journey as we saw it. So when I first owned, I've told this story of on, you know, my TEDx, and I've told the story 1,000 times, and I've told the story of, you know, I met the guy, walked to his house, we had the experience. I haven't talked about what I felt inside of that. So, and what I didn't feel like for another 3 years, by the way, it took me 3 years to build back to that pinnacle experience. But I was lying there, nervous, mental chatter, so very self-conscious. So a kind of almost a fundamental humiliation. It was because there was nothing to distract me from it. There was no, we'll say no sound. I often think of Om is the silence and sex is the sound. And so I was lying there and feeling all of that same way I was feeling it when I was in it was a John Cage concert, this silent concert, in that place where you're just kind of anxious and feeling it. And then he stroked and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. I thought a lot about the fact that I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel anything. And then the stroke came, the whole reason that I'm here today. So truly, if that stroke I would be a chef. But the stroke came, or a Zen nun. I tell this joke in the TEDx talk where I say they used to call me the nun that got some, but because I was going to be a Zen nun prior to this. But the stroke came, and when the stroke came, that's the moment that broke through. And I talk about the traffic jam of my mind was no longer congested. All of those thoughts, all of those conflicts, they were gone. That feeling of being locked into this body or locked out of it, I didn't know which it was, gone. And I broke open into something. And what I broke open into is that silence. So I have worked with women and men. I've worked with men too. But I've worked with a lot of women at this point. I mean, I'm 56 and I was a graduate teaching associate at 26. So 30 years. Yeah, I can do that math. And again and again and again and again, I hear the same thing. It always comes down to the same thing. There's some kind of power in me. I think, I'm not really sure. I think there's a power in me. I'm not really sure about it. And I don't know how to access it. I don't know how to express it. I don't know how to not fawn in certain moments or get rigid and organized in moments or be formal, or I don't know how to just have that kind of natural, spontaneous, uncontrived sense of who I am come out. That's a consolidation of about 10,000 women that I've talked to at this point. So what happened in that moment was I broke open into that silence, and what had been so like a cramp of every time I, as a woman, felt a kind of power rising up, and the fear that I would have to go through what Maria Callas went through, which is the tail. All of that started to unfurl in that space. It couldn't in the congestion or the cacophony of my everyday life. It couldn't in my academic career. It couldn't when I was going hard. Was it there that it began to open? And suddenly it was like, I think this is what it's supposed to feel like. I think this is what I feel like in my own body, on my own terms. That's that sense of power let out of the cage. We talk about this idea of, as a woman, it's almost like having this beast in here, because there's something in there that is so strong and it's so passionate and it's so intense, but you aren't quite sure what it is, right? Because it's been years and years of pushing it down, and it was finally letting it out and then discovering, oh, wait a minute, that's not a monster. That's pure, unadulterated beauty. That's what that is. Mind you, I had to take the next 3 years to learn how to find it again. And then a good 15 years to learn how to work with it. There were no guides. There's no model for how you work with this deep sense that's uniquely feminine or uniquely you. I think that's good. We can take questions.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We'll take questions now. We'll start by taking questions in the room, and then we'll go online. So you have time to put your questions in the chat, and I will read them to Nicole in the room. We're just going to get her a chair. Also, for those in the room, we're sharing this mic. So if you have a question, I'm going to run the mic to you. Who would like to start? Yes. Sorry.
I just loved your whole tale and all of the spotlights. And my question is, I was definitely a woman on a mission, an ambitious woman seeking to express that power. And then what do you, like, how do you talk to other women who, have that ambition, but feel like they're missing something? Because I never want to, I felt like my power wasn't, I didn't see my power reflected in the world. So I was out to prove something. But I don't know how to talk to some of my feminist friends about, all of the striving is also kind of undercutting you in a way. And I don't know how do you suggest you start to have that conversation?
I like what Ram Dass says. It's not that you want too much, it's that you don't want enough. And the question is really what brings sustainable happiness, right? I'm interested in what efficacy and what is it that will bring an unconditional sense of happiness. So you go through everything there is to go through. You begin to look at the science, you begin to look at spirituality, all of it. And lo and behold, what you find is something bigger than you is what brings happiness, right? So, I practice Buddhism, get out of suffering, the causes of suffering, and then do what you can to help others get out of suffering. And I think that additional element of meaning actually has happiness be fortified enough to remain. So what I can tell you, the only way, it's breadcrumbs. It's just breadcrumbs of inspiration. It isn't, because there is no big model that you can follow. So it's just tiny moments of, I listened to a Robert Thurman podcast and I was inspired, or I read On Freedom. I love this book, Maggie Nelson. And I just read it and all of a sudden she offers it and you can see a different vision. Or, I am of the deep belief that everyone should take on a practice. It's the only way for me to go in there and wrestle these things out. And then you get a tiny little glimpse, like a little moment of not being bound by your own mind. And that's what begins to happen in a practice. And so, when I work with people, I'll just say, like, meditate 2 minutes a day. Just, I start really small. I have a little packet I send people. Meditate 2 minutes a day. And then, it'll be small, like, oh, I didn't bark at my boss. Oh, I didn't go to the refrigerator and eat a cupcake. Oh, I didn't. And they're like these moments, though, where you're free from something you've never been free from. And I think you just begin to build those with people. That's what I do. I used to start really big, and I discovered that nobody understood what I was saying. So Schopenhauer says, the truth, at first it's ridiculed, then it's attacked, then it's seen as self-evident. And I saw this self-evident truth, but if you don't see it, then everything that is said on top of that either is going to be dismissed and ridiculed, or it's going to be heard. If you're in the mindset of striving, then anything you hear about another way of life is going to look like another thing you have to put on your to-do list. It's not going to look like a way out of striving. It's going to look like, oh, now I have to strive. Plus, I remember my mom, I hope she doesn't kill me, but my mom went to therapy at 65 or something. I have a Zen therapist, and I was telling her, it's so great, so great. And so she dipped in, and she said, "Oh, honey, this is fantastic. I just thought she was going to teach me how to pretend better." Like she was scared, because my mom is like the bastion of Midwestern good. And so she thought that she was going to learn more ways to disguise her own desire from herself. And when the therapist said, "What do you want?" It was revelatory for my mom. So I think it's little things like that. One of the questions that I often ask when I'm talking is, what would your life look like without duty? What if we're actually organized around what you desire? I can tell you that question to me is not, it's both a beginner and an advanced question, but it's a fairly, I'm familiar with that question. Some of the women I talk to, they've never even thought anything. They've never thought that in their entire lives. They got a script for who to be, and they just went to work because they're good people with good hearts and wanted to be good. And so they just followed every single instruction, and they're hitting the point in the heroine's journey of the aridity or the dryness. And they're finally maybe ready just to have like a little drop of water.
We'll take a question from online. I have trouble trusting other women. How do I build those relationships and that trust?
Wow. So foreign. I have two thoughts. One was the tagline in the woman book is "We're the change we're looking for. We're the change that we've been seeking." And I had a point, I think I was maybe 31, and I was living with two other people, and one of my housemates was we'll call him a trickster and a bandit of the Dharma. He was a trickster, and I had it. And I hit this point where I just thought, I can't trust anybody. And then I looked at the feeling of what not trusting feels like. What was I protecting? Everything is inquiry for me. So what am I not trusting? First of all, what does it feel like to not trust? I can tell you what it feels like. It feels contracted here. And then what am I not trusting? Why wouldn't I trust? Okay, I'm not trusting them to do what? I'm not trusting them to be sensitive to me. Okay, so I'm not trusting them. Do they actually want? Have I communicated to them what I want so that they could be sensitive? No. Well, why wouldn't I do that? Why haven't I done that? Oh, I'm afraid it'll be rejected. Okay. So, and you end up doing the inquiry. I did the inquiry for myself. And it came down to, for me, it came down to the fact that I didn't at that time think my voice was valuable enough to be listened to. And so then I had to make strokes. And the strokes are, in order to become a trusting person, it's so paradoxical. See, there they are.
The roosters are crowing outside.
There's a certain amount of risk you have to take. And the risk is saying what you want. And then we used to say, say what you want and stick around to negotiate. Say 100% of what you want and stick around to negotiate. And that actually is the building of connection. So I think that's number one. And then I think it's a matter of, for me, seeing through the eyes of compassion. So my lama, he says this great thing. There's this Ram Dass quote where he says, we're all just walking each other home. And then my lama will say, like drunken sailors. And what he means is we all have in Buddhism, they're called klesha or obscurations. We all have our weird unconscious things that are functioning, and we don't has everyone not had a friend who thought they were in top form, and you're kind of like, that doesn't look like top form to me. And then a few years later, they say, that wasn't my top form, or done that yourself. I have been so righteous about things, just absolutely positive about my politics, and then been like, excuse me, that was so wrong. And that's the klesha, when you make it through that to the point of clarity. So I think there's a way, I think the only way we're going to make it to where we want to be as a world is if women connect. So then if you begin to see that, then what would be required for that to happen? And that has to start with a ground of trust, a ground of compassion, and a ground of boundaries. Those three things are going to be required. I'm going to have to be able to know who I am, hold a boundary, and then do the work of connecting. And with women, it is so difficult. It is so difficult, not because women are difficult, because what's happening is, as this thing is unfurling, we're just coming to know who we are. So I can tell you something and I can say it from the bottom of my heart. And I'm just coming to know it myself. So there's a certain amount of, groundwork of patience and care with my friends, which would be everybody I've ever met in my mind. The ground premise of all of this work is stay connected no matter what. Keep the door open, keep in both directions, and keep the light on. And so then people can go, they can work with their own stuff, and then they can return and always know that they're loved. The last piece is treat everyone like a prodigal daughter. If anybody knows the prodigal son story, treat all women like whatever had to happen, you'll welcome them with a celebration.
Thank you, Nicole. We have so many other great questions coming in online. I think we have time for one more. We might go a few minutes over just to safeport everyone. This one's from Angela, my dear friend. I love, Nicole, I love the roosters. The roosters are so loud. It's amazing. And I have the best view of the roosters here. There's they're not all roosters, right? They're mostly hens. That's so sweet. Okay. Angela says, Nicole, I love when you said it's not a monster, it's unadulterated beauty. What are ways a woman can begin to deepen in the trust and befriend that intimate, exquisite beauty and quell the idea that it's a monster?
I was just reading James Hillman this morning. He's great. If anybody's familiar with him, he worked with Jung, and he actually, I think, is part of an entire school that would likely be considered a feminine school in many ways. And one of the things that he says is that the therapeutic model that we know has made a grave error. And the grave error that it's made is that it doesn't make room for beauty. And without beauty or art, you view your own behavior in unhealthy or unhealthy, and you have to split yourself. And that what one might want to do is see themselves artfully. If you were watching yourself as a movie or reading yourself as a book or seeing yourself as a painting, then all of these aspects of you put together with continuity and, hopefully to benefit in the way that art is here to benefit, then they can rise. The challenge is that if they're cramped down there, you don't know what they are. And that's where they're scary. But so there's always a moment of opening, and then you see, oh, that wasn't good. And then you need something that's big enough. And that's why I think beauty in Hillman's conception is big enough to make it through that moment. Not the tight, like, oh, I better hurry up and fix it immediately, but actually open and get to know it and have a certain intimacy with it. And then to see how you might use it or work with it or integrate it. Freud has said that which is not integrated is exaggerated. And so there's a way that, all things in their right purpose. When I'll just give you this one last piece. It was truly revelatory for me when I learned about what's called, blue Tara, the Tara of wrath, right? But I only wanted to be good. And so my idea of good was not to have a certain ferocity. And then the idea of blue Tara was introduced as the ability to penetrate and cut, greed, hatred, and delusion. And so taking the kind of irritation that I had repressed and allowing it to evolve and grow into something that gives me a strong backbone. Oh, okay, that's worthwhile. I don't want to just cut it off. I don't then see it as ugly or damaging. In its nascent form, it is, of course, but it can be evolved into its highest form, and then it's of the most use.
Wow. Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions. So I think we should take 3 reflections from the room. They can be reflections for Nicole or something you experienced during the sutra study today. And we'll share the mic. Who would like to start? Yes. Can you pass this to Bob?
Hi, I was really touched by the music and then the follow-up story about the manager talking to her, and I was like, Jesus, it really showed me, I guess even beyond like the damage that we can do, what's possible when we have a deeper level of connection in the new world that we want to build.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my love. I was really moved by when you were saying that which was in my belly. It's not a beast, but it's unadulterated beauty. And it gave me, I want to say, an insight or a whole sight into a touch of a lyric that this love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. And even though I sang the song, I kind of thought it was handed over, or I had inherited it. And so today I get to leave this day in the silence of something that belongs to me that was not given to me. And because it is unconditional belonging, it can never be taken away, dissolved, thinned out. And because it's love, and love is eternal. And so it can't be, as my grandma said, child, it can't be messed with.
Preach, Rev.
I wanted to reflect and share the power made me cry. And I forget the name of the hero's journey.
Joseph Campbell?
Yeah.
Campbell.
And just his response to the question of where's the women, and about everyone's trying to get to, you said it way more eloquently, but that moment you said that, the moment of,
Do you have the quote?
it was just like, his answer was so profound, and really, you can say it again, but that moment for me was just like, my heart burst open, because I really do see men, when they are coming to their healing, really seeing that, wanting to come to the woman in the way that I think that reverence, right? Not putting her up and him down, but adoring her, because his role is to protect and uplift and hold, so she can be in that internal beauty and in the unadulterated beauty, because in that, her oracular ways makes his life so much more uplifted, right? I'm using his and hers in that masculine, feminine. And with the trust question, really for me, the first thing was it's to trust ourselves. And on this journey, as we trust ourselves, we really do remember how safe it is to trust each other, and how much beauty is in that. So if you could say that quote again.
Yeah.
His answer was,
I'll just say one thing. I like the idea of to protect the solitude of another, about what you were saying. Women don't need to make the journey. In the whole mythological journey, the woman is there. All she has to do is realize that she's the place that people are trying to get to.
Mic drop. Amazing. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone online, for coming today. We had over 200 people that joined us live across Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we will see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you, Nicole.